In this video, I'm going to talk about how you can help your child or teen regulate emotion. So emotion regulation means that a person can subjectively tolerate distressing emotion, such as fear, sadness, guilt, or anger, without being flooded or incapacitated by the feeling or having to disconnect from it by way of distraction, dissociation, or intellectualization. Children that are unable to effectively regulate their emotion tend to suffer from temper tantrums or emotional meltdowns, or they might be just excessively rigid or avoidant or anxious about emotional vulnerability or expression. They may also experience difficulty connecting deeply with others or seeking them out for emotional support, which is an important part of psychological resilience. And of course, children and teens and even adults with a low capacity for emotion regulation are going to be at higher risk for depression, anxiety, and other mental health related issues. Now, it's important to understand that a child's capacity for emotion regulation is largely dependent on how parents habitually respond to a child in emotional distress. So you might check out my video on attachment to get a deeper understanding of why that is. In this video, I'm going to give some guidelines for parents on how to respond to a child who is upset. First, by suggesting some things that you generally want to avoid. Your own emotional response is very important. So parents who have a low tolerance for vulnerable feelings will sometimes get frustrated, annoyed, or even angry when their kid becomes emotional. So they might yell or even say things like, "You keep it up and I'll give you something to cry about." And if this happens often enough, the child is probably going to internalize emotion or feel anxious that they'll be punished or even shamed for feeling the way that they do. And all this is going to hinder their ability to experience, tolerate, and express their feelings. In contrast to an agitated response, some parents will actually get panicky or anxious or will themselves become overwhelmed when their kid is expressing a distressing feeling or vulnerability. And this is another sign that the parent is not able to effectively regulate their own emotions. It's an unhelpful response because the child's feelings are now complicated by a concern for the parent's well-being, and the child may even feel guilty for making the parent feel bad. And if this happens often enough, the child will tend to be anxious about expressing themselves and may even develop a guilt complex about seeking out others for support or for help. Parents should also avoid dismissing their child's feelings through rationalization. So, for example, saying things like, "It's not that bad, other kids have it far worse," or "Look, there's no reason for you to feel this way." Even though such comments are sometimes true, so for example, there's always going to be someone in the world who has it worse, responses like this are ultimately unhelpful because they're dismissing or invalidating, and in many ways will leave the child feeling a lot worse. Over time, the child may develop an intuitive sense that their feelings are irrelevant, that they may themselves also learn to dismiss them or feel ashamed for having certain kinds of feelings. A final response that you generally want to avoid, at least initially, is one that appeals to rational problem solving or advice giving. It tends not to help with emotion regulation and can actually cause frustration or agitation, as your kid is likely going to sense that you just don't get it. It also encourages them to intellectualize about their feelings, that is, to think about their feelings without necessarily being connected to the physical experience of them. And this may provide some short-term relief, but it does little in the way of developing those emotion regulation skills that I'm talking about, or emotional intelligence. So for the same reasons, you want to avoid encouraging your child to just distract themselves from what they're feeling. So, for example, reminding them that it's a beautiful day outside, and maybe they should go outside and play, or buying them a toy or a video game to keep their minds busy or distracted. These kinds of things are okay to use in moderation, but it's generally preferable to use them only after you acknowledge and validate the feelings that they might be experiencing. Okay, so having listed some of the things to avoid doing, what is the more appropriate way to respond to a child in emotional distress? Well, first, your nonverbal communication is actually probably the most important part, and it should generally convey concern, interest, and empathy. So, eye contact is obviously very important, as well as having just soft facial expressions, not angry or tense or flat, and to have like an open posture. Remember that this is really not a list of things to remember, but it's more of an attitude that you want to convey. So don't get too caught up in immediate urges to kind of problem solve or fix whatever you feel like the issue is. That can come much later. Rather, the attitude that you want to have is just a tenacious curiosity for what your child is experiencing, and this desire to ensure that however bad it is, that they're not feeling it alone. If your kid feels sad, it's also important to keep in mind that it's okay to get a little bit misty-eyed or feel sad for them, and in many cases is actually a good thing, because it allows your child to experience themselves being felt by another person. They sense that their emotions matter, and so do they, making whatever they're experiencing that much easier to bear. That said, if you have a sense that your kid is feeling bad for making you feel bad, you might need to ask them if this is the case, and clarify. So reassure them that you don't feel burdened by sharing their feelings, and remind them that it'd be more upsetting to think that they were sad, hurting, or suffering all alone, or without you knowing about it. So the second thing that you want to do is ensure that you express verbal validation. And sometimes this just comes from asking questions. So, when did you start to feel this way? How long has it been? Has it always been this bad? What else do you feel about it? Verbal interest or curiosity is validation, since you presumably feel like the issue is important enough to explore it in more depth. And this is why it's important not to just kind of sit there not saying anything and kind of leaving your kid hanging. Asking questions can also help ground your kid a little bit more by highlighting the context around what they're experiencing. So if they're extremely unraveled, this might actually be the preferred approach. However, you also want to avoid overdoing this kind of verbal engagement to the point where it may actually disrupt the ability to stay connected with the visceral feeling. Sometimes it's just enough to give a loving embrace or an empathic look, and I think sometimes parents forget this. Okay, so the last thing, and one that probably comes most naturally to a lot of parents, is to engage in some kind of advice giving or problem solving. So you generally want to avoid going here until after you suspect that your child feels validated. In other words, they feel like their emotions matter to you and that they move you in some way. This should be easy for parents who are connected to their own feelings and are able to regulate those feelings. A little bit harder for others. So once you sense that they feel validated, your child is going to be in a much better place to problem solve or be open to advice or suggestions. And you may find that they're going to be very closed off from doing that until you've actually validated what it is that they're experiencing. Okay, before I wrap up, remember that there's no such thing as a perfect parent, and that every parent has moments where they get frustrated and you're going to respond inappropriately or in a way that's going to be invalidating to your kid, and that's fine. The important thing is to catch it as much as you can, to repair the relationship if you suspect that you've done something wrong. And of course, all of this is just good modeling. So teaching your kid, that nobody's perfect, that we all make mistakes, and that we can unintentionally hurt the people that we care about. In addition, if you struggle with empathizing or regulating your own emotions, just make sure that you don't beat up on yourself. Recognize that there's probably good reason for you to have some difficulty here. Although, once you become aware of it, it is now your responsibility to do something about it so your kids don't have to struggle with similar kinds of issues. Okay, if you've enjoyed the video, please take a minute to give it a like or say so in your comments below, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for future mental health related videos.